The rain had stopped only minutes before Dr. Ayana Mensah stepped through the towering glass entrance of Hanoi International Medical Center. Morning sunlight reflected across polished marble floors so spotless, they mirrored the crystal chandeliers hanging 3 stories above the lobby. Executives in tailored suits crossed paths with surgeons in immaculate white coats. Luxury flower arrangements perfumed the air, while a grand piano played softly near the reception desk. This was not an ordinary hospital. It was where presidents came for discreet treatment, where celebrities recovered without photographers, and where Korea's wealthiest families trusted their lives. Ayana tightened her grip on the worn leather satchel resting against her shoulder. The satchel wasn't expensive. It had belonged to her late mother. She carried it everywhere. A receptionist smiled politely. "Good morning. Name? Ayana Mensah. I'm here for the critical care interview." The receptionist glanced at the computer, then nodded. "Human Resources is on the 12th floor." As Ayana thanked her and walked toward the elevator, voices drifted from the nearby nurses' station. "So, that's the new applicant? I heard she came from overseas. She actually thinks she'll survive probation here?" Another voice laughed softly. "Our VIP patients are going to complain before lunch." Ayana heard every word. She kept walking. Her grandmother had once told her, "People who underestimate you often become your first witnesses." She smiled to herself. The elevator doors opened. The interview room overlooked the Han River. Professor Seo Dong-hyun, the hospital director, sat beside 2 department supervisors. He studied Ayana's resume quietly. "You graduated at the top of your emergency care class." "Yes, Professor." "You also completed additional certification in airway emergencies." "I wanted to be prepared for situations where seconds matter." One interviewer leaned back. "Your references describe you as unusually calm." Ayana answered honestly. "Panic spreads faster than confidence. Patients deserve the second one." For the first time, Professor Seo smiled. 40 minutes later, Ayana stepped back into the hallway. She had the job. Her first shift would begin immediately. As she walked toward the changing room, she noticed several nurses watching her. One of them folded her arms. So they actually hired her. Another shrugged dramatically. "We'll see how long that lasts." Ayana simply nodded politely before continuing down the corridor. She had not come to win arguments. She had come to care for patients. Far above the executive wing, another patient had just arrived. 24-year-old Han Min-sik, the son of Biko Group chairman Han Jae-won, had been transferred into a private recovery suite after a successful thoracic procedure. Doctors called the surgery routine. His charts looked reassuring. His monitors remained stable. Yet one respiratory waveform flickered for a brief second before returning to normal. Nobody noticed. Ayana's first morning began before sunrise. She arrived 20 minutes early. The intensive care corridor was quiet except for the rhythmic hum of ventilators and distant footsteps. Head nurse Yoo Hyejin greeted her with a practiced smile. "Since you're new, we'll start you with a few simple assignments." Within minutes, Ayana realized none of them were simple. She was responsible for 3 high-dependency patients, additional paperwork, equipment inventory, and covering a colleague's medication rounds. Other new nurses usually shadowed senior staff. Ayana was expected to keep pace alone. As she organized medication charts, she heard whispers behind her. "They're trying to see how quickly she breaks. I give her 3 days. I'll be surprised if she lasts one." Ayana continued labeling medication trays without looking up. She had learned long ago that competence answered insults better than words. Late that morning, the hospital atmosphere changed. Security personnel quietly appeared throughout the executive floor. Conversations became shorter. Staff straightened their uniforms. Luxury elevators were reserved. Chairman Han Jae-won had arrived. Tall, impeccably dressed in a charcoal suit, he moved through the hospital with quiet confidence rather than theatrical authority. He greeted physicians respectfully before entering his son's private suite. Min-sik looked tired but smiled. "You look like you came straight from another board meeting." "I did. You should rest more."
Han Jae-won chucklet softly.
"I was about to tell you the same thing." Their conversation was warm, comfortable, and entirely ordinary. For a moment, they were not one of Korea's wealthiest families. They were simply a father checking on his son. Outside the room, Ayana passed while delivering medication to another patient. She noticed the chairman briefly through the open doorway. Their eyes met for less than a second. He gave a polite nod. She returned it before continuing down the hallway. Neither knew how important that passing moment would soon become. By afternoon, Ayana had completed every assignment on time. One senior nurse frowned. She hasn't made a mistake yet. Another replied quietly, give it time. The evening shift settled into its usual rhythm. Monitors beeped softly. Patients rested. Visitors gradually left the executive wing. Ayana reviewed her charts before heading toward another room. As she passed Suite 12, she slowed. Something felt wrong. She looked toward the closed door. The monitor displayed acceptable numbers. Oxygen saturation remained within range. Heart rate was stable. Everything appeared normal. Yet she listened again. The sound of Han Min-sik's breathing caught her attention. It was subtle, almost impossible to notice. Each breath carried a faint strain that didn't match the reassuring monitor readings. Ayana frowned. She knocked gently before entering. Min-sik looked awake. You must be the new nurse. I am. How are you feeling? A little tired. His voice was softer than expected. Ayana checked his posture, skin color, and breathing pattern. The numbers still looked reassuring. But patients were more than numbers. She had learned never to ignore what experience quietly whispered. Would you mind if I stayed for another minute? She asked. Not at all. She listened carefully again. The pause between breaths had changed. Only slightly. Enough to concern her. She stepped into the hallway. A passing resident glanced over. Everything all right? I'm noticing increased work of breathing. He looked toward the monitor through the doorway. Vitals are fine. I know. So, I'd like another assessment. The resident sighed. He's recovering normally. Ayana remained calm. I'd still feel better if we evaluated him. Nearby, two nurses exchanged amused looks. First day, one whispered. Already imagining emergencies. Ayana ignored the comment. She returned to the room. Min-sik smiled faintly. Am I worrying everyone? No, she answered gently. I'd rather check one extra time than one time too few. For a brief moment, he looked relieved. Outside the window, the lights of Seoul shimmered across the Han River. Inside the quiet room, the monitor continued its steady rhythm. Everything appeared peaceful. Yet Ayana's instincts refused to settle. Somewhere beneath those reassuring numbers, something was beginning to change. And within the next few minutes, the entire hospital would discover that the newest nurse in the building had heard what everyone else had missed. The quiet rhythm of the executive intensive care wing shattered, without warning. Ayana had just finished documenting her observations outside Suite 12 when she heard it again. Not the monitor. Not an alarm. A sharp, strained gasp. She turned immediately. Inside the room, Han Min-sik's chest rose unevenly. His face had lost its healthy color, and his breathing had become shallow and labored. In one swift motion, Ayana entered the room. Mr. Han. His eyes opened halfway. I can't. The words never finished. His breathing abruptly stopped. The cardiac monitor erupted into a piercing alarm. Within seconds, the hallway exploded into motion. Doctors sprinted toward the room. Nurses abandoned nearby stations. Security personnel rushed to clear the corridor. Ayana was already moving. She pressed the emergency call button. Code blue. Executive ICU.
Suite 12.
Her voice was calm, firm enough to command attention without creating panic. She immediately adjusted the bed, positioned Min-sik's airway, and began administering oxygen while assessing for obstruction. A junior resident burst through the door. What happened? He deteriorated rapidly. Airway compromise suspected. The resident hesitated, staring at the monitor. Another physician entered. The saturation's dropping. What medication was he on? No. Prepare airway equipment first, Ayana interrupted. Her tone remained respectful, but decisive. We're losing ventilation. For one dangerous moment, everyone seemed to speak at once. Ayana ignored the noise. She focused entirely on the patient.
Bei vel maskulinum.
A nurse handed it over. Thank you. She maintained oxygenation while another physician prepared emergency equipment. Professor Seo rushed into the room moments later. What do we have? Rapid respiratory failure. Ayana answered without looking away. We need anesthesia support immediately. The professor nodded. Call them. Outside the room, hurried footsteps echoed down the corridor. Chairman Han Jaiwon had just stepped off the private elevator after taking an urgent business call. He noticed doctors running. His heart sank. One of his security officers met him halfway. Sir. Jaiwon's face hardened. My son. The officer gave a single nod. Without another word, Jaiwon strode toward the room. He stopped at the doorway. Inside, controlled urgency filled every corner. Machines beeped. Medical staff worked with disciplined precision. But among the movement, one person stood perfectly composed. The new nurse. She issued concise instructions, checked every response, adjusted equipment, encouraged the team.
No panique. No hesitation.
Only focus. Professor Seo glanced toward her. Good catch recognizing the deterioration. Ayana barely acknowledged the compliment. Let's stabilize him first. Minutes felt like hours. Finally, a stronger breath, then another. The oxygen level slowly climbed. The room collectively exhaled. Professor Seo looked at the monitor before turning toward everyone. He's responding. Relief swept across the team. Nobody celebrated. They simply continued working until every vital sign stabilized. Only then did Ayana quietly step back. She removed her gloves, disposed of used supplies, wiped down the equipment she had used. While others discussed the emergency, she silently restored order to the room. From the doorway, Han Jaiwon watched everything. He had expected chaos. Instead, he had witnessed extraordinary composure from the newest member of the staff. He didn't speak. He simply observed and remembered. An hour later, silence settled over the executive floor.
Han minns och reste peacefully beneath careful observation.
His breathing had normalized. The immediate danger had passed. Doctors gathered outside discussing possible causes. Several congratulated one another on the successful response. Ayana walked quietly toward the utility room carrying a tray of used equipment. She wasn't looking for recognition. Patients recovering safely had always been enough. As she finished organizing supplies, she heard footsteps approaching. Professor Seo entered. You handled yourself remarkably. She smiled politely. Thank you, Professor. You noticed something before anyone else. I listened. To what? The patient. The professor stared at her for a moment. So many people depend on monitors, she continued. But patients often tell us what's wrong before machines do. Before he could respond, another voice interrupted. Professor. Chairman Han Jaiwon stood in the doorway. Every conversation in the hallway stopped. He looked first toward Professor Seo, then toward Ayana. His expression remained calm. I have one question. Nobody moved. Who recognized my son's condition first? The hallway became strangely quiet. A resident shifted uncomfortably. Another nurse looked toward the floor. Finally, Professor Seo answered. She did. He nodded toward Ayana. Jaiwon looked at her. You were the first? Yes. And you reported your concerns? Immediately. Were they acted on immediately? The silence that followed was answer enough. Jaiwon's gaze moved slowly across the gathered staff.
No anger.
No raised voice. Only disappointment. I'd like the security footage from this floor. Several faces visibly changed. One senior nurse swallowed hard. Another suddenly remembered an urgent task elsewhere. Jaiwon noticed. So, he said quietly, there is something worth reviewing. Without another word, he thanked Professor Seo for his team's efforts and returned to his son's room. The hallway remained frozen long after he disappeared. Ayana looked genuinely confused. I wasn't trying to cause trouble. Professor Seo answered honestly. I know. The following morning, the executive conference room felt colder than usual. Large monitors displayed synchronized surveillance footage from multiple hospital cameras. Present were Professor Seo, department supervisors, the hospital's legal advisor, Chief Security Officer Ryu Gizeong, and Chairman Han Jaiwon. No one spoke as the recording began. The video showed Ayana arriving early for her shift. Then another clip. Senior nurses whispering while assigning her an unusually heavy workload. Another angle. Ayana requesting assistance after noticing subtle changes in Minseek's breathing. The timestamp advanced. Everyone watched the resident dismiss her concern. Then another nurse quietly laughed before walking away. No one in the room looked comfortable anymore. Chief Ryu paused the recording. She reported her concerns 8 minutes before the emergency. Professor Seo slowly removed his glasses. Replay that. They watched again. This time, nobody focused on the emergency. Instead, they noticed everything that had happened before it. Ignored observations. Dismissive attitudes. Missed opportunities. The legal advisor finally broke the silence. If the patient hadn't survived, he didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. Chairman Han Jae-won remained seated, hands folded. He had spent decades making difficult decisions. This one saddened him more than angered him. He looked toward Professor Seo. Your hospital has excellent technology. Yes. But technology didn't save my son. Professor Seo lowered his eyes.
No.
The newest nurse did. The room fell silent once again.
Professor Seo stood.
Effective immediately, I am opening a formal review of yesterday's events. He looked around the table. Every assignment, every report, every staffing decision connected to this case will be examined. Several supervisors exchanged uneasy glances. Then he added something unexpected. And I want Nurse Ayana's probation protected until this investigation concludes. Outside the conference room, Ayana continued caring for patients, completely unaware that the quiet courage she had shown on her very first day was already beginning to transform the culture of one of Seoul's most prestigious hospitals. 3 days after the emergency, the hospital had returned to its usual rhythm. Patients filled the executive suites. Specialists hurried between departments. The scent of fresh flowers once again drifted through the marble corridors. For Ayana, however, little had changed. She still arrived before sunrise. She still checked every patient twice. She still greeted everyone from cleaners to consultants with the same warm respect. Late that afternoon, a message arrived at the nurses' station. Chairman Han Jae-won would like to speak with Nurse Ayana. Several staff members looked at her with curiosity. Some expected a generous reward. Others whispered that she might be offered a private position. Ayana simply smoothed her uniform and followed the attendant to a quiet family lounge overlooking the Han River. Han Jae-won stood by the window, hands resting lightly behind his back. As she entered, he turned and offered a respectful bow. Thank you for meeting me. It's my pleasure, Chairman Han. He gestured toward a pair of chairs. I wanted to thank you personally. You already have. No, he said gently. I thanked the nurse who saved my son. I haven't yet thanked the woman who chose to stay when she had every reason to walk away. Ayana looked puzzled. He continued. I've reviewed the footage. She remained silent. I saw how some members of the staff treated you. It wasn't pleasant, she admitted, but I didn't come here for approval. What made you stay? She smiled softly before answering. When someone is lying in a hospital bed, they don't care who feels welcome in the staff room. They only care that someone notices when something is wrong. The simplicity of her answer lingered in the room. Jae-won nodded slowly. My father used to tell me that true professionals do the right thing even when nobody is watching. Ayana smiled. My grandmother taught me the same lesson. For a moment, neither spoke. The silence wasn't awkward. It was respectful. Before she left, Jae-won said quietly, My son has another chance because you listened. Ayana bowed slightly. He has another chance because the whole team never stopped trying. Her humility impressed him even more than her skill. The internal review moved quickly. Professor Seo insisted on examining not only the emergency itself, but the culture that had allowed warning signs to be ignored. Schedules were reviewed. Emails were examined. Anonymous staff interviews were conducted. Patterns soon emerged. New nurses had routinely been assigned impossible workloads. Probationary staff were discouraged from questioning senior colleagues. Several employees admitted they had stayed silent because they feared damaging their careers. Head nurse Yoo Hyejin sat quietly through the meetings. She had never intended to endanger a patient. But her pride had created an environment where confidence mattered more than collaboration. Professor Seo addressed the department. A hospital cannot function if experience refuses to listen to fresh eyes. His words echoed through the conference room. New policies were announced immediately. Every clinical concern, regardless of who raised it, would receive documented review. Mentorship programs were expanded. Workload assignments became transparent. Anonymous reporting channels were introduced to protect junior staff. Some employees welcomed the changes. Others realized the old way of doing things had ended. Ayana never celebrated. She simply continued caring for patients. Her example spoke louder than any announcement. A week later, Han Min-sik was preparing for discharge. His recovery had exceeded expectations. Before leaving the hospital, Han Jae-won invited Ayana to a private meeting. "I'd like to offer you a position." She listened politely. "Our family foundation operates medical outreach centers throughout Korea and several neighboring countries." He placed a folder on the table. The role includes leadership opportunities, research funding, and complete freedom to develop patient care initiatives. It was an extraordinary offer. Many professionals would have accepted immediately. Ayana looked through the proposal before closing it gently. "Chairman Han, if your answer is no, I will understand." "It isn't no." He waited. "It just isn't yes, not yet." He smiled slightly. "What would make it yes?" She answered without hesitation. "I'd rather see this hospital become a place where every new nurse has the same chance I was finally given. If I leave now, someone else may face the same treatment." Jae-won studied her for several moments. "You could ask for anything." "I already have." He understood. She wasn't asking for wealth. She was asking for fairness. "I'll support those changes," he said quietly. "And when you're ready, the invitation will still be open." 6 months passed. Hanul International Medical Center felt different. Senior nurses now mentored new recruits instead of intimidating them. Weekly case discussions encouraged every voice to be heard. Junior staff confidently raised concerns without fear of ridicule. Patient safety scores improved. Staff morale rose. The transformation became known throughout Seoul's medical community. One sunny afternoon, Ayana walked through the rehabilitation garden after finishing her shift. Someone called her name. She turned. Han Min-sik approached with an easy smile, looking healthy and energetic. "No monitors this time," he joked. She laughed. "I'm glad to see you standing." "So am I." He paused. "I never properly thanked you. You don't owe me anything." "I owe you my future." She shook her head gently. "You owe it to the people who love you. Make good use of the time you've been given." He promised he would. From a nearby terrace, Han Jae-won watched the conversation quietly. Chief Security Officer Ryu joined him. "The hospital has changed." Jae-won nodded. One person reminded them why they entered medicine in the first place. Across the courtyard, a group of newly hired nurses gathered around Ayana, asking questions and laughing together. One of them whispered, "Is that the nurse everyone talks about?" Another smiled. "The one who saved the chairman's son?" An older supervisor overheard and replied warmly, "Yes. But that's not why she's respected." The young nurses looked confused. "Then why?" The supervisor smiled. "Because she never let praise change her, any more than criticism did." Jae-won watched as Ayana patiently guided the new nurses through their questions. He smiled quietly. Months earlier, she had entered the hospital carrying only a worn leather satchel and quiet determination. Some had laughed. Some had doubted. Now, without seeking recognition, she had helped reshape the culture of one of Korea's finest hospitals. As the evening sun reflected across the Han River, the hospital continued its work, one patient, one lesson, and one act of compassion at a time. Sometimes the greatest legacy isn't saving a single life. It's inspiring countless others to care with the same courage, humility, and unwavering commitment.